Welcome, everyone. Hope you guys are having a good Thursday evening. My name is Garrett McLaughlin. Tonight, we will cover a webinar actually I've done, it might have been 4 years ago now, when I was down in Nashville, teamed up with the physical therapist down there, put this together. This is a little bit different. Some of the details I put in this one, but we covered a very similar topic. So we're going to cover what's called the in-season strength training formula for runners. In the past, over the past year and a half or so, ever since I got more into the webinars, have covered strength training quite a bit. However, didn't really go as far into understanding strength training in more of a periodized model. So based on where you are with your running, if you're preparing for a goal race and you're actually in that training plan, how does your strength training program need to adjust just to make sure you're taking all the key things into consideration? Now, do me a favor before we get started. If you can silence any technology around you, we're going to talk about some principles, some exercises, how to taper properly. So I want to make sure you get the most from the content today. Next up, right now on your screen somewhere, you should see a Q&A button. Click that Q&A button. This will be an area, click it right now myself. This will be an area throughout the webinar where if you have questions, feedback, want to just write a note to me. That will come to me privately, not to everyone else. So please write in there anytime. Again, ask me a question, provide feedback, tell me to slow down or what have you. And while you have that open right now, what I want you to do is take a second and let me know your name, where you're from, and what is that big thing you're trying to get from the webinar today. Now, I'm not talking about what exercises to do, right? A lot of people, and I look at the registration form here, right? All the questions that people input in the registration. We tend to get these fluff things, right? What exercises, build strength, effective exercises, how to strength train, right? Why does that matter to you, right? So what is that big domino that you're trying to push over that you feel will just have a cascade effect on the rest of your strength training in your life? So take a second, write in the Q&A, want to know your name, where you're from, and then what is that big thing you're trying to accomplish? Not just strength train, right? What will better strength training provide you with your running, with your life? Okay, so I'm going to take a second here, wait for a few responses just to see who we have on here. So far, we have about 14, 15 people. So just to get us started here a little bit. Sarah, awesome. That's so funny. I want to look like a fitness model. Rachel, continue with running for years to come. Awesome. Yeah, that's one of my big goals when it comes to just everything, right? The longevity of piece of things. Can we stay healthy? Can we perform well? Can we do this for until we're 80, 90 years old? Tammy, yep, help recover from injuries, right? Continue to run without aches and pains and just continue to progress to running. Dawn, how to understanding how to coordinate strength and race plan. Jen in Minnesota, want to stay healthy for the long term. Good to one other longevity goal there. Jen, how to cut down. How much should I cut down my lifting during peak running season? Julie. I had a meeting with Julie yesterday and I thought she was about to kill me. We were talking about how she's going to get ready for upcoming race. And I was telling her to pull back in some other things she was doing. And I could see her just starting to sweat. So Darlene, want to increase speed, right? Go back to the 7-minute mile days back in high school. All right, so I appreciate you guys writing in there. Any other questions as we get through here? Feel free to drop a question in the Q&A. Andrew, I want to know how to better utilize off and in season the best. Perfect. So as we get through the webinar today, and those of you that have joined me in the past, you know that I always raffle off 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. So this is kind of my flagship program, work with runners locally as well as remotely. So it doesn't matter location. What we do is we complete a running analysis, movement assessment, really try to dig deep to understand what is your body telling us, right? Rather than just providing general strength training and injury reduction advice and exercises, how do we really fine tune that to each individual? Because in the end, it's really those specifics that create the best long-term results here. A lot of you said a second ago, longevity, right, was one of your big goals. You really need to dig into the details there and do something that's more specific for you than just to generally strength train. So after we work and create that do that running analysis and movement assessment, we're going to create you a 1 month in-season strength training program. If you're training for a race, if you're not, we'll design it to your needs, right? How do you combine strength training, running, mobility, core, all of these pieces together in one good cohesive program to see the best results moving forward? So that's what we'll be raffling off at the very end. Just understand that you need to be here at the end to enter your name. So if you have to jump off, I would say come back here at about 7:50 or so, just to put your name in that raffle so you can enter to win that 1 month the healthy running program. I never want to leave people stranded from these webinars. And my pet peeve, just so you know, on the front end, I see a lot of people that continue to jump on webinars that, again, I usually do these 2 or 3 times a quarter, but maybe 3 months later, 6 months later, 12 months later, I see the same people asking the same questions. So what I want to offer to you guys here, if you're not the lucky winner of the raffle, make sure you're signing up for that customization call. What this customization call will allow you to do is let's just talk about these things, right? Let's talk about your injury history, your goals, what's on the radar over the next 3 to 6 months, what you're doing currently, and how do we fine tune things to the best of our ability to get you better results. I want to make sure you're taking action, right? It does you no good to sit here to learn these things, but really, if you're not willing to really, again, jot down some notes, figure out how to adjust your program and take action moving forward, you're really not going to get anywhere. So with that customization call, it's just my opportunity to help you free of charge, just to make sure you're taking the appropriate steps following the webinar today. And I'll post a link in a second, just to make sure you can sign up for that there. At the very end, again, if you're unable to stay for the entire webinar, I will be sending the webinar replay, the winner of the raffle, tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Eastern time. This always notoriously goes into the spam folder. That's how emails and this newsletter software tends to work. So at 11:05 Eastern time tomorrow, if you don't see an email from me, feel free, email me directly, call me, text me, check the spam folder, check the junk folder. It's probably somewhere, and I'll make sure you get the webinar replay if you want to reflect back on that and just make sure you're getting the most from it today. Now, my name is Garrett McLaughlin. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a licensed athletic trainer, strength conditioning coach. Been doing this in different capacities for the past, it's been crazy to say, 12 years now. Started off in the more traditional sports med field, working with collegiate athletics, high school, did some time in big Division I schools, football, soccer, track and field. Over the years, have kind of moved towards the fitness setting, right? Because I just see this big gap right now between physical therapy and sports medicine and fitness, right? There's this huge gray area, especially when it comes to running and endurance athletes. There's such a high injury rate when it comes to these endurance sports, but we're either rehabbing to get back out there or we're training to get faster, but we're not doing a good job combining all these areas together in with a good approach that's going to take everything into consideration. So that's what I try to do with my programs. Currently living in West Bloomfield, Michigan, originally from Boston, Mass. So tend to speak fast, even though I ditched the accent over the years. But again, the biggest thing I love from this is just helping people, regardless of whether you're a runner, triathlete, older individual, younger individual, just trying to find ways to help you live your best life possible, whatever that means to you. Okay. Now, what I want you to learn from the webinar today, we're going to talk about the rules of in-season strength training, in-season underlined. I've gotten into debates with a lot of people over the years, especially runners and endurance athletes, right? When is the off season? I tell people there's certain times throughout the year where you are actually able to back down your training. I'm not saying you don't have to train in any ways. We're saying completely not training or training for a goal race, right? There's a lot of gray in that as well. But as you're in your structured training plan, which could be anywhere between 8 and possibly, right, 20, 24 weeks, depending on the distance in the specific race. That's what I call the in-season time period. We're following a specific training plan and we're building in volume for a goal race. So we're going to talk about some of the rules behind that and what you need to consider with your strength training. Next up, most effective exercises. So I've gotten to the point with the exercises where, and it's so hard to tell you what the most effective exercises are. Everything that I do now and with my clients is so specific based on a running analysis, based on evaluation, right? There are some staples in there, but it all just depends. I start people at such varying points within that. So I think a lot of these things that I show you today can potentially be very good for you. They could also not be what you need in any way, right? It really depends on you, your injury history, and your goals. So just understand that give me a little leeway here when it comes to the exercises, but I think this should at least point you in the right direction, and hopefully you can figure out how to better fine tune from there. Last, I want to talk about, which I haven't talked about before in a webinar, how to successfully navigate the taper. This is, again, a very crucial time, as you'll see, for any runner and endurance athlete, where the research, right? We have great research going to show an article back from 2015, just what you need to take into consideration as you taper for a race, right? Those last 2 to possibly 4 weeks, depending on what works for you. But what you need to consider with your strength training specifically to make sure you're actually able to reap the benefits of everything you've been doing in terms of training up until that point, rather than undoing a lot of what you've been working so hard for. Now, from a strength training standpoint, some of the benefits you'll see, and I know these are pretty common, so don't let me put you to sleep here. But when it comes to strength training, some of the improvements, and these are just some of them, right? There's a lot more too. We can increase speed, right? Be able to run faster, and also time until exhaustion. So just to have a better endurance, better cardiorespiratory fitness to run for longer periods of time. Bone mineral density is huge when it comes to endurance sports. A lot of people don't realize that running, even though there's high impacts in running, it's a very consistent, specific loading pattern over a long period of time. So there's actually not a lot of bone mineral density that you're going to pick up from running. That's why we add strength training alongside running, especially if you have a history of osteoporosis or osteopenia, and especially recommend for the women in the group who are more susceptible to that, making sure we're keeping the bones healthy, because bone stress injuries and those things can be pretty serious and difficult to deal with. Tendon stiffness is another area. It's funny. I think it was on Instagram today. It was a great post too. We're so infatuated by release, right? Self-myofascial release, tissue release, soft tissue work. Like I do that as well, right? Active release techniques, soft tissue work. And people always say, oh, can we release this muscle? But we need to understand that we need to have this healthy balance of tissue length and also stiffness. Stiffness is huge, in particular in our tendons, because that helps us be elastic, right? If we think about a pogo stick, we're landing and we're quickly exploding off the ground. That stiffness is what translates to running economy, running speed, overall efficiency as you're out there, how you use and release energy. So we want a healthy balance of stiffness as well, and strength training can really deliver that. Running economy, like I mentioned a second ago, being able to run in the most economical and efficient way to use as little energy as possible, right? If we're able to run fast and require little energy, we can run fast for a long period of time, right? So that's where these PRs and these just great times come in as we improve running economy, which strength training really helps there. Risk factors associated with injury. So there were multiple people here talking about injuries, right? We have piriformis, SI, knee, IT band, Achilles. With our strength training program, in a very general sense, and through the research, we know what are the most commonly injured areas when it comes to running. So we use that information and we design our strength training program to address those. If we can make things stronger, more resilient, more tolerant to the demands and the impacts of running, it's going to take longer for us to overload those tissues, which will hopefully reduce our likelihood of injury. With that being said, we also need to be specific. So where are you breaking down? Is it running form? Is it specific weakness, lack of mobility at the toe or the ankle, or other things that are causing you to stress tissues, right? So being specific as well and understanding your individual needs is also very important from an injury reduction standpoint. Recovery is one of those key ones that a lot of people overlook. And I see a lot of runners after a couple months, they're surprised. They're like, you know what? One of the biggest things I'm seeing here, yes, I feel like I'm starting to get stronger. I'm starting to see these benefits, but after my long runs, they're not really making me sore or as fatigued or tight the next day like they did previously. So just overall optimizing that recovery period, allowing our tissues to be stronger, more resilient. So as we build up mileage, we're not taxing them to that same degree, right? We're taxing them to a lower degree because those muscles and those tissues are a lot stronger and resilient. And then confidence, right? As we get into a regular strength training program, we start to feel better, more mobile, stronger, improving posture, form, those things. We just overall improve our confidence when it comes to running. Now, here's a quote from Dawn. She sent this over to me earlier today, and I stole this. I know you're on here right now, Dawn. I stole this from your Facebook page, the picture, one of my favorite pictures, I think, out in the snow here in Michigan. But Dawn said, I know that finding time for strength training is often an issue. We'd rather be running. But one of the things I've noticed soon after starting with Garrett's program was that my legs were rarely sore even after an 18-mile trail run. So I don't need to take time for daily foam rolling and random stretching or monthly massages. I think Garrett would say that because my legs are stronger, they're better equipped to handle the running, which is exactly it, right? If we can, I always think about the strength training almost as, and I wish I had something better here to show you. If we have two glasses right here, we have a small glass and we have a big glass, right? How much water can we put in each in those individual glasses? The smaller glass is someone that doesn't have as much strength, right? You're going to pour water into that. That glass is going to quickly overflow. If we can work on strength training, build a bigger glass, right? We can put a lot more water into that without that overflowing. So strength training is a way to improve recovery, improve strength, improve performance, be able to run longer distances without overflowing. Now, some of the rules, and these are the principles of strength training. I always add principles into a lot of my webinars just because people always want to know what exercise, but if we need to understand what are the key principles that we need to adhere to, what is that system, how do we put things together the right way that's going to create success. So when it comes to strength training and some of the principles, periodization, right? We're talking about in-season strength training today. So like I said a second ago, we're specifically focused on that period of time when you're starting your structured running plan and you're training for your goal race. So whether that's 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16, 20, 24, whatever it is, that's the period of time we're focusing on here. Of course, there is no actual off season, even though it is okay in some way to actually take a big step back, right? So it's funny, and I always, you'll see Jessica later on, we always kind of fight over off season, right? One of the things she said today, what is the difference between in season versus reduced season? Because there is no off season. So we need to understand once you finish that goal race as well, we might not be stopping completely, but we're going to take a big step back with our running volume, right? With our training volume, we might be able to increase our strength training. That's where we start to create a lot of those benefits when it comes to strength training, is more in that off-season period of time. In season, we need to be very smart, very focused on staying healthy, reducing the likelihood of injury, and just maintaining some of our strength and power as we build up for that goal race. So periodization is important. If you're someone that does the same thing throughout the entire year, I would definitely recommend rethink that strategy. If you always do that same strength training program in particular, right, it's always 3 sets of 10 of these 6 exercises. Something has to change at a certain point, and we start to, again, we build up our running, we back down our strength training, we back down our running, we build up our strength training, right? This stuff starts to ebb and flow throughout the year. If you're able to do that and string together multiple races, multiple years of flowing through in-season, off-season strength training and running, you'll see some great long-term results. Less is more. This is huge, right? I always talk about the minimum effective dose, and this is even more important as you get to the in-season time. We don't want to put our running at risk by doing more just to do more. There's this belief, and I get a lot of new clients, which is good, during in-season time, right? Hey, I have a race in 2 months. This is starting to bug me. What can I add, right? And I'm thinking, man, I should have done something 3 months ago. You know, like we need to understand that it's really hard to add more volume as you're building up your mileage, because more strength training, more rehab exercises, more running is just more overall, right? It's a lot for the body to recover from, where you're adding more stress to the system. So one of my focuses here is, as people start to build up their running, I try to figure out how do I take stuff away? How do I do less strength training? How do I do only what is needed to see results? So for instance, if you have a headache and it takes 1 Advil to get rid of that headache, is there really any benefit of taking 2 Advil? Is it going to get rid of it that much quicker? Probably not, right? But it carries with it more risks. So that's the same thing when we look at strength training and running. How do we do as much as necessary without sabotaging our running in the process? Specificity. This is super important. So all of these webinars that I host here are general webinars, right? I'm not sitting here talking to one individual person. I'm talking to runners, which have different injuries, different goals, are struggling with different things at that specific time, different injury history, family life, job responsibilities, all of this. There's so many differences here, right? So we need to do a better job of individualizing this strength training stuff into your needs. It's good. I think the best first step, if you're not doing anything, is to just generally strength train. You can't go wrong there. But at a certain point, when you want to take things to the next level and actually reduce your likelihood of injury, actually PR in that race, getting specific is important. So that's a lot of what I do in my programs is figure out how do we really tailor this program to each individual person. Some people, right? Men different than women, but having the conversation, a lot of the women lately about pelvic floor, about, again, having kids, all those things. Like that's the stuff we need to take into consideration when it comes to our strength training program. Histories of bone stress injuries. What sports did you play as a kid? I treat people differently. Again, if we have a basketball player, this guy played high school basketball versus this guy just started running 2 years ago. I'm going to create a completely different training program for them just based on what their body is accustomed to. So getting specific is important. And what I definitely recommend, like I mentioned a second ago, on that customization call, this is the piece we really dive into. Rather than giving you these general recommendations, I want to understand more about you so we can get specific and nail down a strategy that helps you. Now, last one, variable loading. As we continue to do the same boring movement pattern over and over again, we need to understand that that carries with it its own risk of injury, right? If we're always doing the same thing the same way for mile and mile on end, that can create problems. So with strength training, we can add variability within the overall routine. How do we move in multiple planes of motion? How do we load bones and tendons and muscles in different ways where we're not always just challenging it this way, right? So variability is super important. Wearing different types of shoes throughout your training, fast runs, slow runs, hills, right? We want to take a lot of that stuff into consideration with strength training. And as people increase in their mileage, that's when I usually start to back down in some areas that are very typical running exercises. And that's when we add lateral lunges, planer lunges, like multi-planar type movements to just break them out of that overall movement pattern. So let's cover some exercises, right? Now we got through the principles here. Let's cover some specific exercises that I would say are, they could help anyone truthfully, but we'll talk about why they're relevant for runners and show you some videos of those so you can really kind of dig in and digest those a little bit. Now, going back to why we're doing these things, in-season strength training is going to help you target the risk factors associated with injury. Majority of injuries for runners are happening at the knee down. How do we load and target those areas to the best of our ability to offset the injury risk associated with running? As you build up mileage, right? We're not continuing to focus on building strength, endurance, stability, and balance as it relates to our strength training program. Can we implement a program that's going to maintain these things? As we run longer distances, typically our strength starts to decline. So can we maintain some of that strength so we're not losing as much as we get to the higher mileage? And then, sorry, I can't see it because I have a bar right here in front. I think optimize recovery. Yeah, optimize recovery as mileage increases, right? So just like Don said earlier, to be able to run longer distances, but not allow it to take more from the body, right? If we're stronger, if we're more resilient, we can typically run longer without the fatigue, the tightness, some of that soreness associated with pushing the body to that level. So super important, because if you're increasing your mileage and you have a really good strength training foundation, it's going to take a lot longer in that training plan for you to start to really need, like, man, now I need to wear my Normatec boots. I need to kick the legs up the wall. I need to get in a warm or a cold tub, right? I generally feel better longer. So recovery isn't as much as a priority as it is that someone that really does not have that foundation in place. In terms of exercises here, so these are bilateral exercises here as we get started. So these are your staples, right? This is your squat and your deadlift that you cannot go wrong doing these exercises. Bilateral exercises mean they're on two legs. So why that matters and why that's important to point out here, running is a very single leg sport. So we want to replicate that to the best of our ability with single leg exercises. With that being said, single leg exercises require a lot more balance and stability. So I can really do a good job of loading and increasing the resistance on some of these bilateral exercises like the squat and the deadlift to really stress the body, add some compressive forces at the spine, at the hip to build bone density and just overall build strength, power, and endurance. Now, if we look at the top one here, this is just a basic goblet squat, right? We can squat any which way. We can squat with a dumbbell. Obviously, I'm doing it here with a tempo, lowering down 1, 2, 3, and then coming back up. So it has a little bit more of a power component, slower eccentric on the way down and a power component coming up. And you can do this 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up, 3 seconds down, hold for 3 seconds, 3 seconds up, normal speed. It really depends on what your needs are. And I kind of customize that based on the person. But we can use barbells, we can use dumbbells, we can go body weight, a lot of different ways to load the squat, but sitting back into the hips, knees aligned with that second toe to make sure we have good alignment and control throughout that lower extremity, and getting down really depends on your depth, right? We don't necessarily need to get down really low when it comes to running. Running is a very mid-range sport. So I vary the depth based on the person and the amount of range of motion that they're showing me. But that's a very great exercise to get started with in terms of strength training. Next up here, this is a deadlift or a Romanian or a stiff leg deadlift. So knees aren't completely straight, right? I say stiff leg doesn't mean the knees are straight. As I start to lower down into that, the knees are slightly bent and they stay that same angle as I lower down, hinge from the hips, and then drive forward into the hips. So now squat is more of a knee dominant movement. The Romanian deadlift is more of a hip dominant movement. Really important to make sure, let me move this out of the way again. Really important to make sure, hold on, sorry. I got this bar on my screen. That's right in the way of usually everything I want to see today. So really want to make sure we're creating this motion from the hip joint. So you can see hinge from the hip, back is nice and flat. So that's allowing me to focus on maintaining posture so that bar is not pulling me into a slumped or rounded shoulder position, gauging the core, that spine is staying in a nice aligned position at all times. And then I'm hinging into the hips. This is your hip extension, right? So we think of that push off motion as we run. We push off, we propel the body, we create some power and push as we literally bound from one step to the next. This is where you get that foundation from. It's doing exercises like your Romanian deadlifts. Typically, when it comes to these exercises, you can vary the repetitions, number of sets and repetitions greatly. I usually start people pretty conservatively. If we're doing maybe somewhere like 8 to 12 repetitions, learning the movement, getting it down. As they get better at the movements, I usually want to make these heavier, right? Increase the load, reduce the repetitions. We may get down to 3 sets of 4 repetitions, 4 sets of 4 repetitions with a pretty heavy weight. Obviously, being very mindful as they get up in their mileage in terms of the total amount of volume. So it's actually interesting too, as you get up in your mileage, rather than thinking about resistance being the thing that needs to back down, I like to think about repetitions. You're doing a lot of repetitions as you run. So I don't necessarily want you to do 3 sets of 15 of your squats. That's a lot of repetitions running on top of a lot of repetition strength training. That's where I actually start to back down the repetitions a little bit, find a moderate or pretty challenging weight so we don't have a ton of volume when it comes to just overall stress on the body from a repetition standpoint. Now, single leg exercises, this is where really the true benefit when it comes to improving running performance, addressing stability, addressing balance. A lot of those things help translate over to overall efficiency as you run, right? How stable are you on a single leg? It's surprisingly, again, I can see a very mixed bag when it comes to runners. Some that they're statues on a single leg, which I would put, I would say are less likely to see that than those that are really struggling from a balance standpoint. So I really like to make sure we're improving balance, we're stable, we're able to control the pelvis, right? If this is your pelvis, being able to keep that pelvis nice and level straight across, good alignment of the leg, good control of the foot. Now that I say the foot, since a lot of my clients will probably yell at me here as they see me wearing shoes in these, I would definitely recommend take off your shoes as much as possible when it comes to strength training, especially running shoes, right? Running shoes don't work well with strength training. We want to get that foot nice and flat, connected with the floor. We don't want to be wearing these really cushiony Hoka shoes or elevated heel Brook shoes, right? We want to try to connect the foot with the ground. Most of our sensory input comes between the floor and the bottom surface of the foot and the hands as well. So we want to make sure we're not putting anything in between that, and that's not going to allow us that sensory input into the system. That's what helps us really appreciate our position to balance and stabilize and connect with some of these exercises that will really help your running. Let me see, I got a question here. Andrew, a good question. Am I supposed to be shoeless at the gym? If you can, I would. To be honest with you, as best as possible, I would be careful, right? Obviously, we run the risk of dropping something on our toes or people walking around. With that being said, I would try to get the flattest shoe you can own. So they have specific shoes for weightlifting that are flat. We have minimalist shoes. Those are really good for weightlifting. Or if you can take them off, I would definitely try to take them off. I try to go in socks as much as I can, depending on what gym I'm working out in, but just trying to really connect the feet with the ground. Now, as we get through these exercises, first one, step up. Step up is a staple when it comes to strength training for runners because we're truly on a single leg, right? As opposed to split squat and some of these other lunge variations, which we're on one leg, but we're really on two, right? So we really have to focus on balance, stability, driving up through that range of motion. I kind of call this more of a hybrid exercise that we're getting. Like I said, the squats were knee dominant, the Romanian deadlifts were hip dominant. These we're getting both knee and hip pretty equally, but we need to focus on really stabilizing that pelvis, keeping that pelvis level straight across, good alignment of the leg, and then locking that foot into the ground. You'll see a lot of instability, right? As you come down, that foot wants to rock and roll around, that knee wants to collapse inward. Being able to control those things, because those can be potential risk factors for injury when it comes to running as well. This is typically a lot higher than I put people. I don't put people anymore, right? This is old me. New me puts people on 8 to 10 inches, maybe. A first step in a staircase, a cinder block, a platform with a couple of steps underneath. Typically go lower just because running is a very mid-range sport. We don't need a whole lot. We don't go through a whole lot of range of motion. So we want to be, right, going back to the specificity principle, we want to be as specific as possible as we complete that exercise. So this would be a lot more range of motion required while running, which is not a bad thing. However, it does create more instability, which I see runners really struggle with. So I get them lower, we master that, and we usually just increase the resistance. Let's do a low step very well. Nice level pelvis, good aligned leg, foot literally glued to the ground or that platform, and then increase and add as much resistance as you can. Next one, split squat. So back to a squat variation, right? This could be a next step from your traditional squat. Adding more demand on a single leg here, getting you in a split stance position, which is very specific to running, although we're on 2 legs as opposed to being just a purely single leg movement. So bending into that back knee to lower down and then driving from that front knee and quad to come back up, right? Still focusing on pelvic stability and levelness, alignment of the legs, stability of the foot into the floor. But one of the, I think, great lunging variations. You'll notice here, I don't have any lunges, right? Reverse lunges, forward lunges. I always start people stationary because once we start stepping and moving, right, we add that dynamic component to the exercise. It's harder for us to control our position. Sometimes we step too far. Sometimes we step too short. Sometimes we step out to the side. The weight pulls us. If we can lock ourselves in a stationary lunge position like this, I love the results that people see from this because they're being challenged in a single leg split stance type exercise, but they're not moving from one step to the next, and they're able to really perform that increased resistance without having that more dynamic component to things. So I always go split squat, rear foot elevated split squat, and then I go lunges after that. For most people, that's typically sometimes 4 to 6 months after starting the program. So it's not the first thing we go to. Next one here, we have lateral toe taps, one of my favorite exercises. Now band resisted, so it's not super challenging, but the details matter on this one. Pretty much, can you set up on a single leg? Can you keep the pelvis level? Can you keep the leg aligned? Can you keep that foot, big toe grounded? Right, so we're stabilizing the arch in the foot. And then as that band slides out to the side, it's starting to tug at the knee, right? It's starting to tug at my left knee right there. So can I maintain stability of that leg as the band is trying to pull me out of position? So I'm getting that external stimulus, which is telling me you need to push the knee into this position to prevent it from going into what's called the valgus collapse. And that helps improve overall stability and control of the leg. Because you think with a lot of this stuff, as we're landing while running is all 2 to 4 times your body weight coming down on a single leg. So essentially here, yes, we want to be strong, but we also want to possess stability. So as we land in that position, we're not losing the alignment, the control, we're collapsing, right? That's not only a loss of energy, because a lot of muscles are going to have to fire to keep us in position, but also could potentially increase our risk of injury. Like I mentioned before, variable loading, right? Variability, or doing things in different ways. It's funny, I don't think he signed up for this one. I got a client right now who actually just recently picked up pickleball, right? So he's been running. He said, hey, you always talk about how I need to do things in a different way than running. How's pickleball? I'm like, that's great. You know, it's quick, it's explosive. He's moving different ways through a different range of motion. It's faster, upper body rotation. That's a great kind of offset for his running, right? Need to be smart about when he's doing that, how much he's doing it, but adding some variability within the overall movement routine is very important. From a strength training standpoint, we have more lateral or multiplanar movements that I'm going to show you here. We're never moving, right? We're always going straight forward, which is in the sagittal plane, right? That's all forward and backward motion. We're always moving forward as we run, but our body still needs to control in different planes of motion. We control the pelvis, we control the knee from collapsing in. So there are other forces that the body has to experience, but we're never actually moving to the side or we're rotating. So I like to introduce these things at various points throughout the program. Sometimes as mileage gets high, I know this person is doing a lot of running. They're running straight forward. I'm going to add something in to offset that, just to break them out of that plane of motion. So we have lateral squat with the dumbbell here. So one dumbbell lateral squat, I call it, right? Look at the foot position though. It's important to realize and really see as you do this. My left foot, my toe is on that line. My right foot, my heel is on that line. So my feet are actually like this. I'm offset. That helps me sit back into this hip to get good depth. When the feet are symmetrical on that line side to side, it's a little bit harder to sink down and get depth. So this actually allows us to get more range of motion, more opening at the hips in the adductor muscle group, where a lot of runners tend to be tight. We're always so focused on strengthening the glutes, right? But this is we're still strengthening the glutes here, but we're adding more dynamic flexibility into the adductors. Both sides of the joint need to work equally. So we can't just work on glutes, only glutes, adductors, and some of these eccentric control exercises are really important. Next one is just making this more dynamic. So I said a second ago in terms of the lunge, I go split squat first, right? I go lateral squat first. It's stationary lateral work. And then I go dynamic after people master that, right? This one, we can build up a lot of resistance here still. Next step is to add this dynamic component. So I'm stepping, sinking in, coming up into single leg stance, which is a struggle, right? So we have to control that leg all the way up there. So this is the next step that adds a little bit more load into that multiplanar movement. Lastly, here we have the triplanar lunge, one of my favorite ones. Sometimes I have some clients doing this as a dynamic warm-up, other clients doing this actually in their strength training day when mileage gets high, when I want to do a light exercise, but allow them to move fluidly in and out of each position. So it really enhances balance and stability and absorbing into that knee and that hip as they step. But you can see just the variability in the movement. Forward lunge, lateral lunge, tricky, transverse lunge, right? So we have multiple planes of movement happening there. This is a great one. And those of you that want to work on hip mobility, especially opening up the hips, we can add so many different variations of this triplanar or multiplanar lunge. I mean, some people call it a lunge matrix. Forward lunge, 45-degree lunge, lateral lunge, transverse lunge, cross behind lunge, right? Or lunge clocks. There's a lot of different names for exercises like this, but very helpful just to move in different planes of motion. So definitely recommend, because a lot of people are doing the same exercises, your squats, your split squats, your lunges, deadlift, single leg deadlift, those types of things. Really consider if some type of multiplanar movement would fit into your program, which I would probably from the beginning just say yes. Now, the calf is one area that kind of requires its own category, in my opinion. Majority of the demand as that foot is on the ground throughout early stance, mid stance, we're really loading into the leg and absorbing force, is going into that calf, specifically what's called the soleus muscle. We have two muscles in the calf. The gastroc is that bigger outer one. If you touch your calf right now, that outer muscle is the gastroc. If you get a little deeper down in there, that's the soleus muscle. So we need to make sure we have calf strength, calf resilience, Tendon stiffness, like we talked about before. We want that Achilles tendon to be, again, we need range of motion at the ankle, but we still want stiffness in the Achilles tendon so we can store and release energy. That's how we improve our running economy. Now, a couple different ways we can train the calf. We can train the calf into straight leg positions, right? You can see here, leg is completely straight. I'm going through this extended range of motion. So yes, I want to build strength, power, and endurance in the calf. I'm lengthening into that Achilles, that calf, getting some additional ankle range of motion. From a range of motion standpoint, the big toe and the ankle are the two biggest areas where we require that joint to be challenged closer to its end range of motion, right? Everyone wants to stretch the hip and the quad, but in reality, it's the calf, ankle, and big toe, which should be kind of the focus of our attention. So you can see here, we're getting all of that together. We're getting range of motion as we sink down. We're getting strength. We're really training that tendon through a nice long range of motion, because that's going to translate to being able to load the ankle and calf and then be able to quickly push off and propel the body forward. Next one here, a lot of exercise not a lot of people are doing. Something I took from is a really good physical therapist out of Seattle, Chris Johnson. Something I took from him a couple of years ago, and most of my runners are doing something like this. It's a simple wall sit. I wouldn't say simple, but it's a challenging wall sit. Usually try to progress people up to about 60 seconds. I usually don't go past 60 seconds. As they get in that position, nice and low, challenge the quads. We're elevating the heels off the ground. That's where we're getting that soleus muscle. So the calf functions differently based on the position of the knee. Straight knee positions challenge that outer. We're still getting both muscles, but the proportions change. Straight knee position, we're getting that outer gastroc. Knee bent positions, we're getting more of that soleus, right? So we need to bias and make sure we're targeting both, because it's actually this soleus muscle. If you look at some of the research and the numbers on the amount of peak muscle force happening throughout the running cycle, it's actually the soleus muscle here that is really bearing the brunt of it, right? A lot of people are doing regular calf raises, but this is what we need to spend a little bit more time on here, is it really targeting that soleus muscle. This will help a lot of your lower leg injuries, your shin splints, your medial tibial stress syndrome, calf strains, Achilles tendinopathy, plantar fasciitis, foot issues, right? Really strengthening that deeper soleus muscle will help you better absorb force, so we're not overloading throughout that lower limb. Let me see, I think I got a question. Nope, I didn't. Okay. Now, from a core standpoint, truthfully, core, I don't go crazy with the core when it comes to strength training. Just can we do the basics very well? And for me, the basics are breathing and stabilization. We think about running, right, compared to tennis, compared to baseball, compared to hockey or other sports, right? Running, we have a small degree of rotation, but pretty much we're trying to stack the rib cage over the pelvis, right? We're trying to create what's called this canister. So we're not rotating, we're not throwing and going through this large range of motion. It's more so, can we control this midsection here so we can transfer energy from the lower body, upper body, and vice versa? That's the best way for our hips, our lower extremity to work to a great degree. If we're someone that has flared ribs, we're really arched into the back, we have trouble stabilizing and controlling our position, it's going to change mechanics down the chain. So what I'd like to do with a lot of people, we always start with breathing in some way. Can we breathe? Can we exhale? Can we get the rib cage down, engage the core, create that canister, as opposed to the ribs being flared, pelvic tilted, right? Can we find a better centrated position between this canister? I'm not saying we don't want to tilt the pelvis. You need to tilt the pelvis as you run. The pelvis is going to anteriorly and posteriorly tip. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm too far in that position. It's naturally going to happen as you flex and extend the hip. But from a stability standpoint with some of these exercises, can we breathe? Can we exhale? Can we get that rib cage down to better create a centrated position? And then can we put stuff like this on top of it? So our dead bug exercise, keeping a natural curve at the lower back, right? We've kind of, in my opinion, gone too far with flatten the back out on the ground. Our back naturally is in this lordotic position. We have a degree of curvature at the lower back, right? So at what instance do we ever want to be completely flat at the lower back? We want to find that natural curvature at the lower back and then stabilize those muscles around there to control that position so we don't go further into an arched position. But by no means do we need to maintain that back being completely flat on the ground, right? We've gone too far there. But in this exercise, rib cage down, cores engaged, maintaining that lumbar pelvic position. Opposite arm and opposite leg are moving at the same time. And we're trying to just maintain our breathing throughout this drill. That's one thing you'll notice with the core exercises. If you get to the point where you are holding your breath, you're turning red, you probably have gone too far in terms of difficulty. We're just training brute strength at that point. We're not actually training stabilization, because the deepest inner stabilizer is the diaphragm in the pelvic floor, right? If we're not breathing properly, how are we actually activating those muscles to maintain stability? We're probably not. Next one here, I posted this one by accident. I was looking as last minute as I looked through some of the slides here. This is a progression of the hip bridge. This is the band resisted hip bridge with marching. So hip bridges are great exercises working on posterior chain strength, strengthening and spinal erectors, your hamstrings, your glutes. Get the hips up in a position where we're straight between shoulders, hips, and knees, and try not to drop out of that position. So we need to level the pelvis across so we don't tip side to side. And as we lift the leg, we want to make sure the hips don't drop, because we want full extension to be up there at the top. So with the band added on there, this just adds a little bit of hip flexor challenge. So my hip bridge right there, getting glutes, hamstrings, lower back. As I march, I'm marching using that hip flexor to pull up into the resistance of the band. We think about running. This is one of the most specific core exercises for running, right? One leg is pushing off and extending as the other leg is swinging forward, flexing at the hip as it goes through the swing phase. And hip flexors are typically one of the most neglected hip core exercises around. We strengthen glutes like crazy, but we neglect hip flexors. So just something to keep in mind here is, can we do a better job of getting on top of that? Side planks, this is just a simple side plank. I spoke a couple times about pelvic control, obliques, QL. These muscles at the core fuse in between the rib cage, the spine, and the pelvis to try to stabilize that region. Typical side planks are great, building up in time, anywhere from 30 to 60 seconds. Once you get to 30 to 60 seconds, being able to do a single leg version, lift and lower the top leg, lift and hold the top leg. But this is a great, something that you really want to focus on that's really important from a running standpoint. And then last, more upright and dynamic core stability exercises. In here, we're doing 2 dumbbell marching, heavy pair of dumbbells. These are pretty light right now for video purposes, but heavy pair of dumbbells to the point where you feel like you're going to drop them, right? If you're losing grip strength, you're tall, your core is engaged, you have good posture, you're slowly just marching down and back. Dumbbells start to pull you side to side and create the sway that your core has to stabilize on. And of course, you're on a single leg right here. So this almost ties all of these things together into one more dynamic upright exercise. So I like to combine some of these floor-based exercises and then get people upright as soon as possible to load in that way. Now, this is a quote from Megan, and just about general strength training. So she was a college runner, has always done strength training, but as we kind of got through this program, done things in a slightly different way, has done pretty well overall. So she said, though I've always understood strength training to be an essential component of remaining healthy while running, it has only been in recent years that I discovered the importance of running specific strength training. Post-collegiately, I dealt with several injuries that could have been prevented had I known my individual weaknesses and addressed them proactively. Knowing what I need to strengthen in order to achieve my running goals has given me clarity and confidence in my ability to stay healthy, right? So going back to that specificity principle, strength training that's specific to running, and then strength training that's specific to her individual weaknesses. And this is, I think this is a recent race. She won this 50K, first 50K, which was awesome. This is obviously her back in college. Now let's try to get moving here as we talk about the taper. We'll take about 5 minutes, get through this, and we'll start to wrap up. Not a lot of information in this, but I think very important. So how to successfully navigate the taper. This is from, not my opinion here in any way. This is from a research article from 2015. This is what I use. I'm trying to move that bar again. This is what I use when I kind of consider, okay, where is my running client now as they're getting closer that last month before the race. I start to communicate with them. Okay, we have 4 weeks left. Let's talk about how are we going to sketch out a plan? How is this program going to change to allow you to be in the best position possible come race day, right? A lot of people are missing this here. Now, what we see on the graphs on the left side here is training with a taper, training without a taper, right? Training without a taper is just this linear progression. We're just building up in distance and volume in preparation for a race day. If we look below, what happens, we start to build up more distance. We start to build up more fatigue. Our muscle glycogen slowly starts to decrease over time. and our muscle power decreases over time. What the research actually shows is as we get to a certain point, typically 2 to 3 weeks before race day, if we reduce volume, our running volume, and I put into that our strength training volume as well, by 40 up to 70%, right? So imagine that you're reducing, you can potentially reduce quite a bit of your training. We start to, our muscle glycogen, our muscle power actually starts to bounce back significantly. So you can't just push linearly to race day. You can, but from a physiological standpoint, if you take a small reduction in training volume, you can actually function better when it comes to your race. So these studies showed that even by reducing volume, come race day, you can actually have an increase in fitness or maintain your level of fitness after backing off. So this is really important to realize. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with the taper is just, I mean, it could be different for every single person. Some people, I've seen it's a week, it's 3 weeks, it's a month, right? It's a different period of time where volume of your running is slowly reducing as you're getting into those last few weeks in preparation for the race. From a strength training standpoint, we also reduce volume. I try to make sure that, right, if we're going to back off running because we want to replenish muscle glycogen and power and being able to be in the best position to run, we need to make sure that we're not just continuing to push through strength training and limiting some of those benefits that we typically see. So with the taper, I try to make sure, okay, what is your running volume looking like? How do you feel at this point? It's a really good time to get on top of some of these aches and pains and things. If running volume is going to back down and we know something's bugging you, we're going to address that in that time. Most likely we can get that to feel a whole lot better by race day. But a lot of times people back down, things feel better, but they're not doing anything to actually address the underlying problems. They get up to the race and that thing just comes right back, right? Whatever the ache or pain is. We need to be smart about exercise selection and timing, right? When are we doing these things? What exercise are we doing? Like some of the examples I showed in the past, for some people, depending on the person, right? We might go from split squats back to regular squats. We might do split squats. We were doing 3 sets of 10 for split squats, but during the taper, maybe we're going to 2 sets of 10, right? We're trying to maintain relative intensity. We don't want to just take everything away. Because that's what you see from some other runners as well. As you get close to that taper, hey, I have 2 weeks, 3 weeks to my race, strength training. I'm done with strength training. I got to make sure I don't get hurt. If you've been doing it for the past whatever many months, you're not going to get hurt from it. You're probably just going to lose more overall fitness and strength in that time period by stopping it. Backing down is the simplest way. Let's go from 2 or 3 days a week to 1 day a week. Let's go from doing 10 exercises in a workout to 5 exercises in a workout. Let's go from 3 sets of everything to 2 or to 1. As long as you back down, you're still going to maintain relatively everything that you've created up until that point. We just got to make sure we're allowing the body that time to replenish itself. Looking at these graphs on the left side, these are super interesting to look at. By tapering, again, runners showed about I think it was like about a 3 to 4% improvement in performance from those that tapered to those that did not taper. And then from a muscle standpoint, these are the biggest benefits we're going to see. And this is why talking about the tendon stiffness, running economy, power, and just at maximal strength, we actually see about a 15% increase in fast twitch muscle fiber size. That creates that explosiveness and that elasticity in the muscle, in the tendon, right? And then from there, we can actually increase muscle force. So those of you that want to run faster, right, you're aiming for a PR, but you're not giving yourself time to taper, you're losing all these results, these benefits in the process. So you need to make sure that as you consider how's my running backing down, my strength training in some way also needs to change based on where I am with my running. And this is one of the most important things when it comes to in-season strength training, right? We want to maintain levels of strength. We want to back down as well when we get to the taper, but maintain some of our intensity. And that's where we really maximize on race day. Simple quote here. Again, this bar is in my way. Generally speaking, the problem with most athletes is not a lack of training rigor, but demonstrating discipline and pulling back on training when necessary. Most people can train hard. They have a trouble actually scaling back, but the research shows scaling back is one of those last pieces to really set you up for success. So this is the last quote. This is Jessica here. I think I mentioned her earlier. So this is after one of our plank challenges, me just suffering utter defeat after we did some kind of Bosu plank, and she always celebrates and kind of rubs it in my face. But if you want to PR your goal race, you have to respect the taper and trust the process. This means to be gentle on your miles and pace, lighten the load on the weights, remove fearless plyometric drills, but to spend extra mindful minutes with mobility drills to stay loose. Mobility is truly where the magic is during the taper. The couch stretch, calf raises from deficit, and quadruped hip cars have been my staples the week and day before my goal race. During the taper, you're tempted to do more, but don't let self-doubt rattle your game plan. Keep this in mind during the taper. Do you want to win the workout or perform on race day? Super important. You need to be confident enough in your training plan up until that point to be able to perform your best on race day. And her plan changes quite a bit, right? We a lot of strength training type stuff, a lot of lifting stuff. We start to shift our focus. We still do that to a lower, or less of a degree there. We start adding more of that mobility. How do we keep the body feeling fluid, moving well, staying pain-free? So those are the little pieces that start to ebb and flow as you get into in-season strength training, but also closer to the taper. Now, as we start to wrap up here, and if you guys have any questions, feel free to drop that in the Q&A. We'll do the raffle here in a second as well. We'll enter names into that. But where do you go from here? In-season strength training is about training smarter, not harder, right? From a strength training standpoint, your running is picking up. Strength training, you might have to back down to a degree just to accommodate that. We don't want to keep pouring water into this. More strength training, more running, and this thing overflows, right? That's injury, that's overtraining, and that's burnout. So making sure that you have a big Yeti bottle that you can pour enough water into, but we're not overflowing that bottle by doing more just because we want to do more. Follow the key training principles. Think about periodization, minimum effective dose, specificity, and variable loading. Those should create kind of the foundation of your program and should really change based on where you are in relation to your race. Determine out of the exercises that we did today, which ones best fit your needs, and then just complete them 1 to 2 times a week, right? We don't need it to be extreme. I've heard from people recently, oh, I do this class 6 days a week. That's great. From a running standpoint, is that great? Right? That's a lot. So we need to determine how much can the body handle? How are we going to back that down as we increase our mileage, just to make sure more of a good thing is not a better thing. Okay. Be confident enough in your training, and go back to the taper, that you can taper to reap the benefits and train well and hit your running plan. Be smart with your strength training, be able to back down that 2 to 3 week time period before the race. Be proactive. I tell everyone this, take a more proactive approach to your body and stop reacting to issues. 70 to 75% of runners get injured each and every year. The clients that do everything I ask of them still suffer from injuries from time and time again. The good thing is they've been doing things for so long that the severity is usually greatly reduced, but we need to do things before they become a problem. If injury rates are so high and we run, we get injured, we go through the rehab process, we run, we get injured, we go through the rehab process, we need to get done with the rehab process. That's when this process starts. Get evaluated, get a running analysis, create a very specific strength training program to take that final step so those things don't come back around, because you're more likely to suffer from an injury that you've already had. And sometimes going through that rehab process for 8, 12 weeks in some situations isn't enough to fully get past that injury once and for all. So take that next step and get a good strength training program created. Now, 3 things I want you to do right now. First and foremost, we're going to enter names into the raffle. I'm going to put a poll on the screen. Do you want to, there we go. Do you want to enter the raffle? 1 free month in the Healthy Running Program. We'll design whatever we need to design for you, understand your goals, injury history, needs moving forward. If you're a client of mine right now, say yes. If I do pull your name, I will give you this monetary amount off your next bill. So make sure you're entering and it does apply to you. And just to be as specific as possible, create you that plan and hopefully crush that next race of yours. But we'll kind of dive into the details with that. Gonna wait 10 more seconds and move on and start to wrap up. Awesome. All right, let's move on here. Now, next thing I want you to do is, not everyone will win that raffle. So I'm going to post a link in the chat box. It's going to come to all of you right now. Also texted you guys a couple minutes ago. I made sure that's sent at 7:50. I always think about this and I look at the list of people, and a lot of times we see the same people over and over again asking the same questions. Again, this is your opportunity to get your questions answered, learn how we can individualize and get more specific on this content, on injuries, on running form, in a way that fits your needs. So schedule that customization call, completely free, about 30 minutes, and you'll definitely leave with more guidance moving forward. Because I hope in 6 months and 12 months, you're not the same person reaching out saying, hey, remember that thing I mentioned 6 months ago? Yeah, that hurts more now, or it's still an issue, or I haven't gotten faster or figured this out yet, right? There's really no excuses here. I want to help you do that and get on track as best as possible. And then take action. Hopefully some of you will review back on this, reflect on this, have taken some notes, sketch this out, right? Write down those principles, write down some of the exercises, look at your running plan, figure out where you can really connect these pieces together in the best way. If you're unsure, you should be on that customization call, because I will help you firsthand figure that out. But if you want to take action on yourself, take action now. Stop thinking about these things, right? A couple of people contacted me 3-4 months ago, and the same people I see on Facebook right now that are struggling with different things. We didn't take action when things weren't an issue, and now they're an issue. You can't react to running. You need to be proactive. So take advantage and get on track as best you can. Now, any questions here as we wrap up? What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a couple questions that were put in the registration, just to get us going. If you have a different question, feel free to drop it right now. I'm going to hang out for the next 3 minutes or so. And question here is, so Patty asked about the use of weight machines versus body weight. A couple different ways we can look at that. If we think about it from a specificity standpoint, we want to be upright in loading the muscles and the joints in a more upright fashion. With that being said, do I still use machines for some of my runners? Yes, 100%. If I know someone has a history of knee injury, I might load that with a leg extension machine, or a hamstring issue, we might do a leg curl. Or I know their calf is weak, and the easiest way to get that calf stronger is to do a seated calf raise at the gym, right? I still take advantage of those to the best of my ability if they're necessary. But with that being said, we can't assume that all machine-based training will carry over to running. Just because we're stronger and we're stable as we're sitting there doing that piece of equipment doesn't translate to stability, doesn't translate to shock absorption and controlling the body and those other aspects, which are super important when it comes to running. So I would say, if anything, you do a mix of those. It doesn't have to be one or the other, but I would probably push you more towards free weight and upright movements. Connie, great question. Strength exercises to do at the gym, which hopefully you provided right there, but it's still able to run distance outside without legs feeling like lead. This is taking advantage of the off-season time period, which most people aren't doing, right? Most people are like, oh, I have a race in 12 weeks. I need to get stronger. At that point, it's almost too late, right? We don't necessarily want to get, if we can, that'd be great, but we don't want to interfere with our running and our program. So using that off-season period of time, if you have a race in October and you say, I need to get stronger, I don't want my legs to feel like lead now, do as little strength training as possible to stay healthy. Once you finish your goal race in October, that time, that 8 to 10 week time between October and January should be where you really reduce your running volume. You dig into the strength training so you can hopefully be stronger, that you can then back down again. So as you increase mileage, you're not also increasing the demand on the lower body, right? So you need to be really smart about how to do that. I'm definitely reach out. I have a couple suggestions for you. Joanne, getting past avoiding injury, been down since March. So super tricky. And I think a lot of people say avoiding injury. And I always say there's no way, right? There's too many variables when it comes to running life. Just because you do this stuff, do I think this is going to allow you to not get injured? No, right? I have people do what I think is some really good stuff, and I watch them go out there and they train too hard, they lack recovery, they're not eating well. I had that conversation with a couple of people recently. They're losing weight, and we're like, okay, you're losing weight, you're in a state of energy deficiency, right? So that's when things tend to happen. There's too many variables, so we can't truly prevent injury, but by doing these things, we can hopefully reduce the likelihood of it. Nicolette, strength training for injury prevention, right? Just talked about that kind of strength training without bulking up. Technically, the chance of endurance athletes bulking up is minimal unless you're doing too much volume, right? Look at the people that bulk up. We look at bodybuilders. the nutrition, the hormonal challenge, the amount of volume within that strength training program. Typically runners don't get to that. A lot of the research shows runners don't necessarily bulk up because your endurance training is going to offset that gain in muscle mass. So I wouldn't necessarily be too worried about that. Some people's body type responds differently. But if that's you, it's not something I would necessarily be too afraid of, because we want that muscle mass to a degree to offset just the repetitive endurance activity. Now, let's see what else. Jen, quick and easy program to add to my running program that doesn't require a lot of equipment or space. Hopefully this helped. I'd also have and definitely if you want to jump on a call and sketch us out a little bit more. I didn't cover any upper body. I do upper body as well, mobility, range of motion stuff as needed. There's a lot of different aspects of strength training, in my opinion. I kind of just showed you just a brief look into it, but if you want to talk about that a little bit more, happy to sketch some of these out with you, understand kind of what you're actually trying to accomplish, what the injury history looks like. I also do have a free 28-day program, 28-day accelerated program that is all body weight and can be done at home. So kind of your injury reduction exercises, your mobility, your core, full body strength training, very simple, but can also be effective. All right, guys, so that's it. If we don't have any other questions, I'm going to look through what people said before. Longevity, gain strength, help recover from injuries, coordinating strength and race plan. Hopefully we helped answer that. Healthy long-term. How much should you cut down my lifting routine, Jen, during peak running season? Depends on, yeah, it needs to cut down for sure. If you're doing, I recall from February, I think we're doing 3 strength days potentially. I would probably cut down to 1 actual strength day, and that second day might be more body weight, lower intensity, but then having your mobility, having your other stuff. I mean, you can do core, you can do upper body, that stuff I'm not really concerned about, but some of the lower body stuff in there to really kind of back away from just a little bit, but make sure you're maintaining the intensity to some degree. All right, guys, so that's it. I appreciate you jumping on the webinar this evening. I'll send a replay tomorrow, raffle winner, schedule that customization call. I'll be closing that tomorrow night, and there'll be no longer the ability to sign up for that. So do that as soon as you can, just so you don't miss out. Hope you have a great Tuesday evening. And once again, thank you for joining me live.